Disturbing cinematic hook, first 8 seconds. They were told to never dig there, but when the floorboards cracked and the smell rose, it wasn't rot, it was revelation. Now listen carefully. What you're about to hear was never meant for public ears. The documents were sealed, the land was sold, and the silence bought. But silence, like time, eventually collapses under the weight of truth. What they found beneath that farmhouse in Virginia wasn't just a crime, it was a system. Engineered, ritualized, hidden in plain sight. And it had worked, flawlessly, for 22 years. 34 was the year the mask slipped. It began like any other brutal winter in Henry County, a farmhouse just beyond the Millbrook tree line, 200 acres of land, and a couple, Ezra and Constance Sullivan, who neighbors considered odd but harmless, generous even. Constance was known for her soft voice and deep pockets, especially when donating to the Methodist Church or buying up half the general store's medicine cabinet. But what no one could explain, not then and not fully even now, is how 47 children ended up chained underground, no shared blood, no common language, no legal trace, only a single word on their lips, whispered like a prayer to something dark. Mother. And here's the part that should terrify you. The basement wasn't improvised. It was planned, dug over decades, stone-lined, soundproofed, sectioned, systematic. Who funds a dungeon under a farm? You're thinking, surely someone knew, someone suspected, and you'd be right, a few did. A traveler heard crying, a hunter heard screams, but each time the community looked the other way. Why? Because the lie felt safer, because believing meant doing something. And in systems like these, the ones built on secrecy, action is the only threat. This wasn't just the madness of one woman, this was method, a quiet machinery of Ming, erasure, and subjugation, all beneath the surface of ordinary American life. Ask yourself this: how many Sullivan farms still stand today, untouched, unexplored, because no one thought to knock twice? And now you're here, listening, which means you've already stepped too far down the path to turn back. Welcome to the descent. The problem with monsters is that they rarely look like monsters. They dress well, they smile politely, they wave to their neighbors and donate to the church. Constance Sullivan did all of that, and more. She played the role perfectly, the role she needed to play, because if you want to build a prison under your home, the first thing you have to do is convince the world you're not a warden. The neighbors didn't see a villain. They saw a woman of God. A woman who'd taken in poor orphaned souls from the north, said they were her late sister's children, said they just needed rest, medicine, patience, and the townsfolk, broken by their own losses, believed her, because it was easier than questioning the cracks. One of the children was seen once by the store clerk, a face in the back of a wagon, pale, expressionless. The clerk asked. Constance answered with her usual gentle smile. She's still mourning. That was enough. No one asked again. But here's what they didn't know. Constance Sullivan didn't find those children. She collected them. Some were purchased from orphanages that sold the unwanted. Others were kidnapped, taken during storms from rail stops, from river crossings. And a few were given away. Parents too poor, too broken, too desperate to ask why a Pennsylvania woman wanted a child in the middle of winter. The records found later would show names crossed out, ages scribbled beside notes like obedient, defiant, mute, or gifted. It wasn't compassion, it was curation. And her basement wasn't just stone and shackles, it was a laboratory for control. Each child was stripped of identity. No last names, no history. They were taught to say one word when questioned. Mother. It wasn't a title. It was a command. Do you see it now? The Sullivan secret wasn't just hidden beneath floorboards. It was hidden in behavior, in psychology, in the blind spots of decent people who wanted to believe the best, because belief requires less courage than truth. If you think this is just about 1834, you're not paying attention. The same script plays out today, in different clothes, different names, different buildings, but the essence is the same. Hide the prison behind a smile, and teach the prisoners to love their cage. You've heard the first whisper, now listen for the next. You want to know how it lasted 22 years? You want to know how nearly 100 children vanished without a single arrest, without a single headline? Because the system didn't fail. It worked exactly as designed. Let me say that again, slowly, so it burns in. The system didn't fail. It worked. The town of Millbrook wasn't ignorant. It was conditioned, taught not to look too long, trained to trust surface impressions, encouraged to keep things within the community. You think that's unique to 1834? You think that mindset died with the horse and carriage? No, it's alive and well. It lives in neighborhoods where screaming is dismissed as domestic troubles. It lives in institutions where broken children are passed like documents through bureaucracy. It lives in every place that teaches silence over suspicion, conformity over confrontation. And Constance Sullivan understood this perfectly. She was methodical. She rotated which child was ill each time the local doctor asked questions. She produced fake letters from distant relatives. She learned every official's routine. She donated, smiled, and prayed louder than anyone else in town. That's not insanity. That's strategy. And Ezra? He wasn't a passive accomplice. He was the architect. He designed the basement to be modular, expanding slowly year by year, always under the guise of agricultural storage. He paid workers separately, sometimes months apart, so none saw the whole. Not one of them realized they were building something inhuman. It gets worse. When the sheriff finally entered that cellar, when he stepped into that darkness and saw the iron loops bolted to the stone, the soiled rags, the shivering bodies, he froze. Because somewhere, deep inside, he knew this didn't happen by accident. This took planning, funding, a network. There are whispers, buried court records, vanished ledgers that suggest the Sullivans weren't working alone, that some of those children were never meant to stay in that basement, but were moved, traded, placed. For what purpose? Think carefully. Why build a system of obedience? Why erase identity? Why train a child to fear light? Not for ransom, not for rescue, for use, for transformation. And that's the part no one wanted to investigate, because the deeper they dug, the more they found reflections, not of monsters, but of men in power. Some wounds fester because healing them would reveal too much. And this wound? It still bleeds. By now you've realized something. This wasn't just a basement. It was a blueprint. The deeper the sheriff's investigation went, the less it felt like the work of a deranged couple, and more like an initiation chamber. Every detail in the Sullivan basement had a purpose. Every ring, every chain, every brick, laid with deliberation. The space beneath that farmhouse wasn't chaos. It was order, a kind of twisted, inverted sanctum, the opposite of a church, but built with the same solemnity. Let's talk about the walls. They were lined with lime-plastered scripture, not biblical, not English, written in what one investigator called an archaic cipher. Characters resembling early proto-Canaanite glyphs, symbols that had no business in rural Virginia. One of the deputies, Marcus Webb, wrote in his journal that the central chamber had an altar, not a place of worship, but of instruction. Its surface was etched with concentric circles, worn smooth at the center, as if something, or someone, had been bound there repeatedly. Now ask yourself, what kind of prison needs an altar, and what kind of captor teaches ritual instead of fear? Because that's what the Sullivan children were subjected to, not just chains. Doctrine. Several of the survivors, what little they could speak, repeated phrases that investigators assumed were gibberish, but a linguist brought in from Richmond later identified the root syllables as belonging to a long-dead Mediterranean dialect, extinct since the Bronze Age. Why would orphaned children in Virginia chant fragments of a forgotten tongue? Who taught them? And why? You see it now, don't you? This wasn't just captivity, it was programming. Constant wasn't simply hiding these children, she was rebuilding them, deconstructing their language, erasing their identities, breaking the mind until only obedience remained. Then, she taught them something older, something deliberate. There are whispers in academic circles, the ones that still care about truth, that what was found beneath that house resembled more an initiation cult than a crime scene. And that should terrify you. Because if one family in 1834 Virginia was doing this without interruption for 22 years, how many others were? How many still are? We call them tragedies. But to someone higher on the chain, they're called training grounds. There's something most people don't understand about evil. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come cloaked in fire or chaos. The deepest forms of evil arrive dressed in purpose, draped in rituals, in ancient symbols, in order. The kind that doesn't just harm the body, it reforms the soul. And that's exactly what was happening beneath the Sullivan farmhouse. You've already heard about the altar. But what wasn't revealed to the public, not in court documents, not in archived newspapers, is what surrounded it. 24 wooden chairs, hand-carved, each with a different symbol etched into its back. Sun patterns, crescent moons, serpents wrapped around keys, human eyes with no pupils, no two alike, but clearly part of a shared system. A system of roles. Investigators didn't understand what they'd found, but others did. Quiet men in black coats arrived from Richmond 2 days after the cellar was opened. They weren't part of the sheriff's department. They didn't flash badges, and they didn't leave their names, but they took everything. The journals, the records, the strange carvings, gone. What remained was sanitized for the public. A disturbed woman. A tragedy of the times. No larger pattern suspected. You believe that? You believe the symbols, the languages, the methodical architecture, all of that beard was just coincidence? No. Someone else stepped in, someone above the system that should have prosecuted her. Ask yourself this: who benefits from silence? Who has the power to erase history but preserve the methods? Because that's what happened. The Sullivan case didn't end, it was absorbed. Patterns like this don't die, they evolve. They find new houses, new basements, new names. And if you're starting to feel uneasy, good. It means you're finally hearing what I'm saying. What if the Sullivans weren't the origin, but the experiment? What if someone somewhere was watching it all, recording the data, measuring obedience, testing thresholds? What if 1834 Virginia was the prototype of something global? Think about the institutions you trust, the ones that handle your children, your information, your future. Do you think control starts in government? No, it starts in basements, where memory is broken, where language is rewritten, where obedience is not requested, but installed. And now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. They didn't just want to imprison the body, they wanted to erase the self. The children rescued from the Sullivan basement weren't able to speak in full sentences, not because they were mute, but because language had been replaced. Words like mother, home, and light had been redefined, twisted to mean something else entirely. In that darkness, obedience wasn't enforced with whips, it was taught with repetition. Day after day, whisper after whisper. Think about that. The true cage wasn't the chain. It was the belief system inserted where identity used to live. Survivors told of rituals performed in total silence, tasks repeated endlessly, sorting objects, reciting symbols, staring into black mirrors made of obsidian. They weren't punished for getting answers wrong. They were punished for asking questions. Sound familiar? It should. Because that's the root of every major control system in history. Kill curiosity, reward conformity. Strip away the why and replace it with the how. That's not just abuse, that's programming. And it wasn't accidental. The chamber beneath the farmhouse was lined with inscriptions, not just on the walls but carved into the floor. Geometric shapes that matched no known architecture of the time. Circles within triangles, stars with broken arms, glyphs identical to those later found at archaeological digs halfway across the world, in places like Malta, Crete, and even Sumer. What were those symbols doing in 1834 Virginia? You're beginning to understand. The Sullivan operation wasn't isolated. It was part of something older, something that predated the United States, perhaps even civilization itself. Because long before we had nations, borders, and governments, we had systems of control, priestly orders, blood cults, ancient schools of obedience and transformation, where the goal wasn't to kill the child but to remake him. Now think carefully. What if the Sullivans were practicing remnant knowledge? What if they weren't mad, but devout? There's a line you cross when you realize this, that some acts of horror are not born of chaos or impulse, but devotion to a secret order, a hidden lineage of control. And those who practice it, they don't see themselves as criminals. They see themselves as engineers. The basement was their blueprint. The children were the clay, and America, just another field to be seeded. You'd think the townspeople would have known. 24 children, over 20 years, missing, gone. Not just from the town, but from memory. No posters, no candlelight vigils, no headlines screaming for justice. Ask yourself, how does a small town forget 2 decades of missing children? They don't. They're taught to forget. Because the control didn't stop at the cellar door. It reached into the church pews, into the schoolrooms, into the sheriff's own office. There are reports, scrubbed from the official record, of witnesses stepping forward during the investigation. Farmers, widows, one teacher. They spoke of strange wagons arriving at night, children seen on Sullivan property, then never seen again. Within a week, each of those witnesses retracted their statements. One of them, Eleanor Thatch, was found hanging from her porch, ruled a suicide. No investigation followed. You really believe that was coincidence? Or was it containment? Because once evil has purpose, it demands protection. The Sullivan land itself was curiously exempt from taxation. For nearly 15 years, it remained untouched by auditors, surveyors, even census takers. Not once did a court agent visit the property, despite legal orders. When the sheriff finally did raid the home in 1834, it wasn't because of a warrant. It was because a child escaped. That child, name unreleased, identity erased, wandered into town with half her head shaved, barefoot, clutching a wooden figurine carved in the shape of a coiled serpent. She didn't speak for 3 days. When she finally did, she didn't speak English. Not at first. But the first recognizable word she said, obey. What kind of house teaches that as a first word? You're seeing it now. This wasn't just about the Sullivan family. This was about the infrastructure around them, the silence, the shielding, the system that allowed to bow its own 24 disappearances to go uninvestigated. And that system? It still exists. Different name, different face, same function, control information, suppress dissent, erase memory. Every time you see a headline vanish, every time a name gets buried under new noise, you're watching the same machine that protected the Sullivans at work. Because evil like this doesn't survive in the shadows. It survives in plain sight. When the crowd agrees to look away, not everyone stayed silent. There was one man, a local physician named Dr. Alphonse Greer, who saw through the lies. Greer wasn't just any town doctor. He was educated in Europe, fluent in Latin, trained in anatomy, psychology, and ancient religious practices. He had seen patterns like this before, in abandoned monasteries outside Prague, in sealed libraries beneath Lisbon. He recognized the carvings beneath the Sullivan home for what they were, a ritual sequence. But Greer made a mistake. He tried to tell the truth. In a letter addressed to the Virginia State Assembly, now preserved only in fragments, Greer wrote, "What we've uncovered is not madness. It is method, a deliberate engineering of obedience through ritual disorientation. The symbols are not decorative, they are operational. Whoever designed that cellar did so with intent, to rewrite the self from the inside out." That letter never made it to the assembly, but a copy was found in his attic along with notes, drawings of the altar, diagrams of the 24 chairs and their positions. He was mapping the system, decoding it, and just as he began to make progress, he vanished. No body, no farewell, no trace. His home was purchased by an unknown entity weeks later and burned down during renovations. His name was scrubbed from medical records, his office repurposed, erased, just like the children, just like the cellar. But some say his notes survived, not in books, in people. Because before he disappeared, Greer met with a select few in town, a librarian, a preacher's son, and a midwife named Clara Dunst. 3 weeks after his disappearance, Clara left a message on the door of her clinic. "They are remaking the world one mind at a time, but we are not blind." She too disappeared. So ask yourself, why do the ones who see always vanish? Because systems of control don't fear violence. They fear witnesses. People who know what to look for. People who understand that obedience isn't accidental. It's installed, step by step, ritual by ritual, until you believe the lie is your own thought. And Greer? He wasn't silenced because he was wrong. He was silenced because he was right too early. And now you know. Which side of history will you stand on? When the Sullivan house was condemned, officials claimed the entire structure was demolished, but that wasn't true. Not all of it. A single wing of the basement, the eastern chamber, was sealed, not destroyed, bricked over by order of a federal agent whose name does not appear on any official roster. No photos, no badge number, just a signature, L.E. Cross. For years that name meant nothing, until 1964. That's when an amateur historian named Ruth Ellison filed a Freedom of Information request regarding Operation Hollow Past, a little-known project cataloging pre-Civil War anomalies. Among the declassified materials was a map, hand-drawn, fragile, coded. It matched exactly the layout of the Sullivan cellar, except for one thing: a tunnel leading from the eastern wall stretching deep beneath the property, labeled in faint red ink, Crown Root. No context, no legend, just that phrase. And what lay beneath it? More symbols, more geometry. This wasn't a basement, it was a network. And if Crown Root was real, it meant the cellar was never the end. It was the entry point to something deeper, older, hidden. Ellison took her findings public. She gave a talk at a local college. Only a dozen people attended, but within days, she received a cease and desist from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Why would they be interested in a 19th century cellar? Unless it wasn't just history, unless it was infrastructure. A blueprint for something still in operation, something that required protection. Before her notes were confiscated, Ruth managed to scan one last diagram. It showed not just the tunnel, but a pattern repeated beneath multiple properties in Virginia, Kentucky, and southern Ohio. Identical layouts, identical symbols, identical silences. Whatever the Sullivans were part of, it spanned states, maybe nations, and the phrase Crown Root. It appears in one other place, an apocryphal text found near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, a text warning of a system designed to unmake men by seed and cipher. Unmake, that's what it was always about, not destruction, redesign, and if these tunnels still exist, then so does the machine, still humming beneath your feet, waiting for the next family to open the door. You've heard of sleep paralysis? Waking in the night, unable to move, eyes open, mouth sealed, a figure at the foot of the bed, a shadow, a presence. They tell you it's neurological, that it's harmless, that millions experience it. But here's what they don't tell you. The earliest documented cases in North America begin directly after the Sullivan home was sealed, specifically in counties surrounding that house. Same descriptions, same sensations, and in several cases, same words spoken by the entity standing in the room: obey. Coincidence or leakage? Because the Sullivans didn't just participate in a ritual, they perfected one, and parts of it got out. Remember those 24 chairs? They weren't just restraints. They were instruments, positioned at exact angles in correspondence with ancient Mesopotamian designs. Yes, Mesopotamian. Greer's notes referenced a lost tablet from the library of Ashurbanipal, one that spoke of the gates of recursion, a process by which identity could be looped, broken, and rewritten. It was never about worship. It was about control architecture. And if the configuration of those chairs could bend a mind inside a cellar, then imagine what happens when those patterns are replicated globally. How? Media, architecture, curriculum. Modern urban planning has adopted layouts that mimic the same geometries from the cellar, down to the angles, spacing, and sequence of exposure. Why do you think malls, offices, and even schools are designed to funnel movement through narrow, controlled pathways? Because it's not about convenience, it's about conditioning. The Sullivan ritual wasn't an isolated event, it was a prototype, and we've been living inside its descendants ever since. Every time you feel a thought that doesn't quite feel like your own, every time your instincts say run, but your body stays frozen, every time you wake up and can't scream, you are brushing against the same dark machinery that began beneath a farmhouse in 1834. And that machinery, it feeds on patterns, on repetition, on rituals disguised as routine. So ask yourself, who taught you what normal is? Because if the answer didn't come from you, it came from them. And they're still watching. There's a rhyme. A children's game still whispered in parts of Virginia. One by one they take their seat, hands in lap and eyes to feet. 24 the circle tight, speak no wrong or lose your sight. You've never heard it before? That's the point. It's only sung in certain towns, certain playgrounds, places where the name Sullivan still echoes behind closed doors. It sounds harmless, just another eerie old verse. But historians noticed something strange. Each line of the rhyme matches precisely the order of commands found in Dr. Greer's surviving notes. The ritual instructions supposedly spoken in the Sullivan cellar before the children entered the altered state. Hands in lap, eyes to feet. 24. Circle tight. These weren't just rules. They were triggers. Mental postures that prime the children for obedience. And now, they're being recited by children who've never even heard of the Sullivans. Why? Because rituals don't need belief. They just need repetition, especially among the young, whose neural pathways are still flexible, still open to suggestion. So when these rhymes survive, they don't do so by chance. They're embedded, passed down through innocent games, circle time, story songs. That's the brilliance of the system, to hide the horror in plain sight. One researcher, a linguist named Eileen Maris, traced 47 similar rhymes across Appalachia, all with subtle references to circles, seats, and sight. She compiled them into a thesis, but it was rejected, not for bad science, but for what the board called inappropriate psychological implications. Then she disappeared too, left town mid-semester, left everything behind, except a single note scribbled on a chalkboard. They've normalized the ritual. Now the ritual normalizes them. Think about that. You train the child to follow the pattern. Then the patties. Russian trains the adult to never question it. And by the time you realize something is wrong, you're already seated, hands in lap, eyes to feet, just like they taught you. Just like the 24. The Sullivans were a devout family, or so they said. Scriptures lined their walls, they hosted prayer meetings, they donated land to the local parish, but behind the hymns was a structure, one that mirrored not Christian doctrine, but something far older. You see, the ritual uncovered in their basement wasn't just spiritual, it was systemic. There were roles, a speaker, a witness, the hollow, the vessel. There was a hierarchy, those who observed, those who obeyed, and one who never blinked. And the family? They played all of them. They weren't a family, they were an order. And here's the terrifying part. Modern institutions, churches, courts, even schools, began to mimic this exact pattern in the decades that followed. 3 core roles: one who commands, one who complies, one who watches in silence. Sound familiar? It's not a coincidence. After the Sullivan house was sealed, several members of local law enforcement received quiet promotions, including Sheriff Elbridge Gray, who later oversaw disciplinary protocols in regional schools. His method? Observe, isolate, instruct. It was the same triad found on the Sullivan ritual wheel, 3 interlocking functions that, when repeated, could fracture a person's will without physical harm. No bruises, no scars, just compliance. By 1902, school manuals in Virginia began including exercises in silent obedience drills. Students seated in rows, hands folded, eyes down. They called it discipline, but it was conditioning. Even churches began adjusting their sermons. A preacher named Wallace Dunham introduced a ritual called stillness before sight, requiring congregants to sit in silent reflection for 24 minutes before communion. 24. The number again. Over and over, the pattern crept outward, into pulpits, courthouses, classrooms, and no one noticed, because it all wore the face of authority, of family, of faith. But faith without question isn't faith, it's programming. And if the family unit itself was modeled after the Sullivan design, then what does that make our traditions, our rules, our obedience? Because the deeper you look, the more you realize. The Sullivans didn't build their house to reflect society. Society was rebuilt to reflect the Sullivans, and now we live in it. Every day. We've talked about the 24 chairs, the ritual, the whispers. But there was one thing Dr. Greer didn't record in her notes, not because she missed it, because she was told not to. In the deepest part of the cellar, beyond the main ritual chamber, past a narrow hall carved into the rock, was a door, heavy, iron-latched, marked with a symbol not from any known religion. When local masons tried to open it in 1894, 2 of them fell violently ill. One went blind, the other began speaking in a language no one recognized before dying 72 hours later. It was left untouched for another 19 years, until 1913. A private team, under government contract, returned with industrial tools. They breached the chamber. What they found inside? A 25th chair. But it wasn't like the others. It was carved from stone, fused into the floor. Older than the house, older than the Sullivans, and seated in it was a figure. Not a corpse, not quite a skeleton, but something in between. Perfectly preserved, head tilted upward, eyes open and black as tar. No decay, no rot, no mold, just stillness. And on the walls, etched in perfect spirals around the chair, were the same 4 words found in Greer's private notebook. Do not wake the vessel. But here's what chills you. This wasn't the first sighting of such a figure. There are pre-Civil War accounts from slaves fleeing north, claiming to have passed a sleeping man beneath the hills whose breath made the trees shake. Native folklore along the Shenandoah speaks of the Still One, a presence in the earth who dreams in circles and feeds on memory. Even early Puritan journals mention a shadow entity that sits within stone and turns the hearts of men against their kin. And now it had a location. The Sullivan home wasn't just built on haunted ground, it was built to contain something, or worse, to speak to it. Because when Greer reviewed the audio logs from her brief time in the inner chamber, one clip, just 4 seconds long, captured something no one could explain. No footsteps, no whispers, just one word, in a voice that didn't belong to anyone on the team. Soon, after 1913, the Sullivan property was officially declared condemned. Publicly, it was due to structural instability. Privately, it was something else. Too many men had seen the chair. Too many whispers were surfacing, so they did what all good institutions do when truth threatens the order. They rewrote it, they sealed the cellar, destroyed Dr. Greer's original logs, and then, piece by piece, they replaced the story. First, they commissioned a children's book, The Curious Sullivans of South Hollow, a whimsical tale about a quirky family who built tunnels for imaginary friends. It sold 120,000 copies in its first year. Then came the town fair, rebranded as Circle Day, a celebration of community, togetherness, unity. They even made a replica of the 24 chairs, painted in bright pastels, and let children sit in them for photos. They turned the ritual into a game. But the darkest stroke? They made the site a historical landmark. They whitewashed the house, landscaped the yard, and turned the basement into a museum exhibit. No mention of the stone chair, no mention of the 25th occupant, only a plaque. The Sullivans, a legacy of curiosity and community. And it worked. Within a generation, no one questioned the stories. The few who did, silenced, ridiculed, or disappeared, like Eileen Maris, or Dr. Greer's assistant Paul Latham, who tried to publish a memoir in 1928, then vanished on the day of his release party. All they found was his coat, hanging on the iron gate of the Sullivan home. And here's what's most terrifying. This isn't just about the Sullivans. This is how every cover-up works. You don't hide the truth by burying it. You hide it by giving people a better lie, a brighter, safer, more playable version. You turn horror into heritage. You turn ritual into culture. And then, when someone stumbles on the real story, you call them unwell, paranoid, obsessed, because once a lie becomes tradition, the truth becomes dangerous. In 1957, a state archivist named Thomas Ray was assigned to digitize local government documents stored in a neglected basement under Richmond City Hall. Boxes upon boxes. Rotting paper, faded ink, rats. It was dull work, until he found one marked, Sullivan, restricted, level 4, do not duplicate. He thought it was a mistake. Virginia had no level 4 classification. The highest was level 3, for classified military correspondence. But the box was real, heavy, padlocked, and sealed with wax. Not an official seal, but a symbol, a black circle inside a square with 4 dashes. Sound familiar? Ray took it home. Inside, 5 things. A reel-to-reel tape labeled Chamber Echo, March 12, 1913. A child's drawing of 24 stick figures holding hands around a hole, a blood-stained hymnal with no page numbers, a newspaper clipping from 1834 about the original Sullivan House fire, but this version claimed no one survived, and a small stone disc, smooth, black, warm to the touch. Ray was found dead 2 days later. No wounds, no signs of trauma, just seated in his chair, eyes wide open, a circle drawn in ash on the floor around his body, no prints, no fire. The autopsy, cardiac arrest, but his heart had no signs of damage. His hands were clenched around a note, 6 words. I heard them whisper inside me. The tape was confiscated, never digitized, never entered into official inventory. But Ray's cousin, a journalist named Eleanor Finch, claimed to have heard it. She said the recording starts with silence. Then slowly, voices begin to layer over each other, dozens, speaking in different languages, overlapping but synchronized in a pattern that always returns to a single chilling phrase. One sits still, so all may move. What does it mean? No one knows. But the stone disc Ray held, the one later taken by government agents, has Sue faced before. Carvings just like it have been found in Assyrian tombs, Minoan ruins, and in Viking burial sites where no Viking remains were present, always with the same shape, always warm, always near people who vanish or die, listening. Because once you open the box, the voices don't just come out, they come through. In 1957, a state archivist named Thomas Ray was assigned to digitize local government documents stored in a neglected basement under Richmond City Hall. Boxes upon boxes. Rotting paper, faded ink, rats. It was dull work, until he found one marked, Sullivan, restricted, level 4, do not duplicate. He thought it was a mistake. Virginia had no level 4 classification. The highest was level 3, for classified military correspondence. But the box was real, heavy, padlocked and sealed with wax. Not an official seal, but a symbol, a black circle inside a square with 4 dashes. Sound familiar? Ray took it home. Inside, 5 things. A reel-to-reel tape labeled Chamber Echo, March 12, 1913. A child's drawing of 24 stick figures holding hands around a hole, a blood-stained hymnal with no page numbers, a newspaper clipping from 1834 about the original Sullivan House fire, but this version claimed no one survived, and a small stone disc, smooth, black, warm to the touch. Ray was found dead 2 days later. No wounds, no signs of trauma, just seated in his chair, eyes wide open, a circle drawn in ash on the floor around his body, no prints, no fire. The autopsy, cardiac arrest, but his heart had no signs of damage. His hands were clenched around a note, 6 words. I heard them whisper inside me. The tape was confiscated, never digitized, never entered into official inventory. But Ray's cousin, a journalist named Eleanor Finch, claimed to have heard it. She said the recording starts with silence. Then slowly, voices begin to layer over each other, dozens, speaking in different languages, overlapping but synchronized in a pattern that always returns to a single chilling phrase. One sits still, so all may move. What does it mean? No one knows. But the stone disc Ray held, the one later taken by government agents, has Sue faced before. Carvings just like it have been found in Assyrian tombs, Minoan ruins, and in Viking burial sites where no Viking remains were present, always with the same shape, always warm, always near people who vanish or die, listening. Because once you open the box, the voices don't just come out, they come through. By the early 2000s, the Sullivan story had all but disappeared. The chair, the disappearances, the rituals, reduced to whispers in obscure forums and rejected academic theses. Until 2007, that's when a viral video surfaced on a dark corner message board, posted anonymously under the username Empty25. Title, The Game They Don't Know They're Playing. It showed a classroom. Children, about 8 or 9, sitting in a circle of chairs. One child in the center, still, silent. The others chanting softly, one stays still, so all may go. Speak the name, or none will know. The teacher stood nearby, watching, not leading, observing. At first it looked like a school activity, maybe a memory game, maybe a trust circle. But when the child in the center blinked, the video glitched. Not a normal digital glitch. The faces of the children warped into static masks, eyes widening unnaturally. The sound pitched upward into tones that linguistic AI could not decode. The clip ends abruptly after 84 seconds. It spread across fringe sites within hours. Then it was taken down, not by copyright claims, not by user deletion, but by a blank legal entity with no origin address, just a string of numbers, 0407 CI25. Accounts that reposted the clip were deleted. Users who commented on it received warnings from their ISPs. Some reported home visits by individuals claiming to be from the Federal Digital Integrity Bureau, an agency that doesn't exist. But the phrase, "one stays still so all may go," started showing up elsewhere, spray-painted behind a mall in Indiana, etched into a church bell in Wales. Whispers recorded on subway security audio in Tokyo. No context, no source, but always tied to groups of 24. Why does this keep happening? Because the ritual never stopped. They just normalized it, turned it into playground chants, branded it as team building. B. You read it in TikTok trends, games, even corporate retreats. But one rule remains constant: the 25th never speaks, and the 25th is never chosen. Because the 25th was never meant to be human. In 2011, a new daytime talk show launched on a major American network. It was light, harmless, celebrity interviews, home design tips, pop psychology. But one segment stood out. Every Friday, the host would feature what she called the seat of truth, a single ornate chair placed in the center of the studio. Audience members would volunteer to sit in it. Then they'd be asked personal questions by the host, nothing invasive at first. But as weeks went on, the questions changed. Who are you without your name? What do you remember before birth? What would you give up to stay remembered? The segment became a sensation. People reported crying uncontrollably in the chair. Others couldn't remember what they said. One woman claimed she left the studio and found an extra key on her keyring, one she couldn't match to any lock she owned. But here's what made researchers finally take notice. The chair. It was never introduced, never acknowledged beyond its segment. But frame-by-frame analysis revealed something chilling. Its design matched precisely the description of the Sullivan artifact from 1834, down to the ironwood grain, the missing fourth leg, and a barely visible symbol etched beneath the seat. A circle inside a square. A studio intern leaked photos from behind the scenes. One showed the chair being moved. It took 6 people, yet official weight logs said it weighed 41 pounds. And the episodes containing the seat of truth, they've been wiped from streaming. Syndication versions skip entire Fridays. The host? She disappeared from media altogether in 2014, citing a need to forget things I never should have known. In her final public interview, she was asked what changed. She looked into the camera, calm, certain, and said, "There were always 24 questions on the card, but I only ever asked 23. Then she whispered, "The last one was meant for the chair itself." That interview never aired, but transcripts leaked, and one production assistant later claimed in therapy sessions, the chair wasn't furniture, it was waiting. In 2017, a sealed estate auction took place in Richmond, Virginia. Private bidders only, no cameras allowed, no published catalog. But one item caught a journalist's attention, listed simply as Lot 1834B, Southern Gothic Portraiture, unattributed. She tracked down the buyer months later, an anonymous collector who agreed to show her the piece. It wasn't a painting. It was a mirror, almost 6 feet tall, ringed in black iron, glass warped like water. But what made it terrifying was what it showed. Not a reflection, a scene. Fixed, unmoving. A stone room. A woman in white seated in a chair with no legs, and surrounding her, 24 figures, standing still, faces obscured, hands folded. Some were in 1800s clothing, others modern. One wore a corporate ID badge. All were watching her, silent. Except the journalist swore. When she stared long enough, the woman blinked. The collector laughed it off, called it pareidolia, but weeks later the mirror was gone, stolen during a break-in. Nothing else touched. No cameras caught the thief. The door was locked from the inside. That same year, a genealogy blogger named Ty Mason began investigating patterns of vanishing families in the Virginia Tidewater region. He discovered a shocking overlap. 24 family lines, going back centuries, had no living male heirs past a certain generation. And all the female lines, they ended in isolation, fire, or permanent institutionalization. All but one, Marla Jennings, now living under a new identity in Oregon. When Ty visited her, she denied everything until he showed her a photo of the mirror. She froze, then whispered that was the only way they could hold her in. She's the 25th. She was the chair. Ty asked who she was. Marla replied, we never knew her name. We only knew her by the sound that ended the first ritual. Ty didn't publish the interview because 2 days later he vanished from his hotel room. No signs of struggle, just one thing left behind, a circle of 24 coffee cups perfectly aligned on the floor, and one chair turned to face the corner. By 2019, threads of the Sullivan legacy began surfacing across the globe, not in history books, in blueprints. Architects, cryptographers, even rogue AI analysts discovered something chilling. Public spaces, malls, airports, courthouses, across multiple continents were being designed with anomalous seating patterns, always 24 fixed seats in a circle, one unattached, slightly off-center, facing away from the rest. Sometimes it was a bench, sometimes a booth, sometimes a void where a chair should be, but the math never changed. Security footage revealed that the 24 seats were used constantly. But the 25th, no one ever sat in it. Even in overcrowded terminals, people would rather stand than take that lone, misplaced seat. In one Beijing airport terminal, a woman tried. Witnesses say she lowered herself to sit, then stopped, eyes wide, hands shaking. She whispered, "Not yet," and stood up again, without explanation. She died 3 days later in her sleep. The coroner marked cause of death as electrical misfire of cardiac origin. Her family said she had no history of heart issues. At the same time, AI speech models analyzing dark web data began flagging an unusual audio pattern. A 5-second vocal tone embedded in videos, games, and even meditation apps. It was never labeled, never described. But when fed into a sonographic analyzer, the visual output was a chair, a 3-legged chair, with 24 spectral lines surrounding it. The AI named the sequence, recursive code 25 awake. No one knows who embedded it, but versions appeared in over 2,000 digital products. Some were government-funded. When questioned, developers said the audio came from a shared public domain library, but no such library could be found. And one voice, in a podcast deleted 48 hours after release, left a warning. The ritual didn't fail, it scaled, because the CD hair wasn't just a place. It was a node, a memory anchor, a receiver for something older than belief and deeper than blood. And now, it was no longer bound to a house in Virginia. It was everywhere. In 2020, deep inside a classified annex of the Library of Congress, a restricted document was unsealed for review. Stamped, Project Silo 25, do not copy, do not replicate the seating order. The report was originally filed in 1958 by a little-known psychological operations division under the Department of Defense. Its subject: unexplained synchronization of traumatic memory across multiple military families in Virginia. They found that across 24 households, all located within 50 miles of the original Sullivan estate, children were experiencing identical nightmares. Each child described a room of still people, one woman nailed to wood. She kept asking them to sit, but none of them would. When someone finally did, we all forgot what happened next. The project was shut down. Until the mirrored artifact resurfaced in 2017 and the media obsession with truth chairs followed. That's when the Pentagon ordered a full-scale subconscious contagion analysis. They found something that shocked even hardened analysts. A visual glyph discovered in a pattern of civilian brain scans across multiple states. The scans weren't connected, but the glyph was identical, not language, not symbolic, just Geometry. A circle inside a square, inside a larger circle, and inside that, a void. That same year, an internal memo circulated between DARPA researchers. We're no longer asking if the Sullivan architecture spread. We're asking how many times it's already activated without detection. The memo included recommendations: immediate decommission of circular seating installations in federal buildings, audits of all archived interrogation transcripts for references to the 25th or the missing seat, psychological screening for federal employees exhibiting symptoms of chronological bleed, defined as the inability to correctly place personal memories in linear time. One official wrote in the margins, "We thought we were guarding history. We were holding a loaded trigger." Weeks later, the entire annex where the file was stored flooded from beneath. No plumbing, no storm, water just appeared. The archivist on duty swore he saw a woman standing in the center of the room, drenched, smiling, barefoot. When asked to describe her, he just said, "She was older than silence, and she wanted to know where we put her chair." By 2021, private contractors working for an international tech conglomerate called Andros Systems began sounding alarms. They weren't religious zealots, they weren't conspiracy theorists, they were designers, UX architects, coders, behavioral researchers, and what they discovered disturbed them more than any software anomaly ever had. Across 3 continents, users were engaging with certain platforms in a predictable sequence of 24 interactions. Scroll, click, pause, react, swipe. But the 25th interaction, it never came. People would freeze, devices would crash, apps would shut down inexplicably. And when the sequence was reconstructed on secure test machines, staff started having shared dreams. Dreams of a basement with no entrance, of an empty chair facing a mirror that didn't reflect, and most disturbingly, in multiple languages, users began typing this phrase into unrelated apps: "We have gathered, but she has not risen." Some tried deleting the programs, but those same systems reinstalled themselves remotely. Files dated back to 1834. Impossible, obviously, but the metadata was verified, and one file, flagged for linguistic anomalies, was named Jennings Protocol V25, RTF. It contained a prayer, but not a prayer to a god, a summoning. Each line began with, "We remember," then detailed pieces of memory that no living human could know. A circle of ash in the floor of a sealed nursery, the smell of burning velvet on the day the estate was buried, the name Marla Jennings, repeated 25 times, but crossed out each time. At the bottom, a final line: "She was removed from memory, but not from pattern. The pattern remains, and she is learning to wake alone." The file couldn't be deleted. Even air-gapped systems brought it back after formatting, so they stopped testing. Andros Systems shut down the entire lab, but the lead researcher received a voicemail the next morning. No voice, no breathing, just scraping, like a chair being dragged across concrete. He quit, left the country, but the sound followed, appearing in his phone recordings, TV static, even white noise generators. He wrote one final note before disappearing: "If you sit in the wrong place, you won't vanish. You'll remember too much." By 2022, memory researchers at the University of Edinburgh made a quiet discovery. They weren't looking for folklore. They were studying false recall phenomena, the brain's tendency to invent memories. But what they found was that certain false memories were consistent across test subjects who had never met. In blind trials, dozens of people described a wooden spiral staircase they had never seen, a velvet curtain nailed into a wall, a woman crying behind a locked door, a voice whispering, "Don't sit yet, not until it's dark." And when prompted to draw what they saw in their dream, every subject included a single black chair with no back legs. Researchers dubbed it the chairman's illusion, until one professor realized that every drawing from every subject, when placed on top of each other, created a perfect silhouette, the original Sullivan parlor. But there was no way these test subjects had ever seen it. It was never publicized, only found in restricted archives. Still, somehow, they remembered. That's when it started spreading. Online forums, sleep paralysis groups, and lucid dream subreddits were flooded with accounts of people saying the same phrase. I sat, and then I woke up. Here. But when asked to describe here, the answers varied. Some said a town with no clocks, others said a house that felt like their own, but wasn't. One claimed a chair in the woods with 24 shadows around it, and one simply wrote, I'm still sitting, please wake me up. Doctors labeled it shared cognitive distortion, but their EEG tests told a different story. Brain scans showed elevated theta waves identical to those seen in deep trance meditation, except these subjects were fully awake. One neurotech startup tried to simulate the experience using VR. After the 25th test subject, the experiment was halted permanently. She woke up screaming, over and over again. It's not the chair, it's what sits beneath. For 12 hours, she repeated those words without pause, then went completely silent. The last thing her vitals showed before flatlining. A second heartbeat, not hers, beneath hers, as if something else had always been waiting. By early 2023, something changed. It wasn't just dreams anymore. It wasn't just memories resurfacing in scattered minds. It was coherence. Patterns emerged across the globe, subtle but undeniable. In a small town in Hungary, 25 people simultaneously collapsed during a theater performance. In northern Quebec, villagers found a ring of 24 chairs around a mirror sunk in the ice, with a name etched into the glass, Marla. In California, a podcast about ancient furniture myths went viral until listeners began complaining of phantom sounds, dragging wood, breathing, laughter without a mouth. The hosts laughed it off. Until the lead narrator was found sitting bolt upright in his basement, eyes burned shut, both ears filled with black wax. No signs of struggle, just a note in his own handwriting. She remembered me. And then I remembered her. Meanwhile, a retired linguist from Yale submitted a controversial paper. His claim: the Sullivan glyph, the circle inside the square, inside another circle, wasn't just symbolic. It was grammatical, a structure for organizing memory, or more precisely, a prison for it. Each chair in the original circle was an anchor, a psychological weight, a ritual of containment. But when the 25th was removed, it opened. He titled his theory, The Syntax of Silence, and in its final paragraph he warned, "We are not haunted by the dead. We are haunted by what the dead tried to suppress." Survivors of the Jennings estate, those few still alive, began dying in rapid succession. Some by stroke, others by heart failure. But in each autopsy the same anomaly, a cavity in the base of the brain. Not natural, not surgical, like something had been scooped out, all 24 of them. That left only one name unaccounted for. Clara Jennings, the girl who had once sat in the 25th chair and vanished. A photo surfaced in a government archive under TED. It showed a girl sitting cross-legged in a salt circle, smiling at the camera. But the file name didn't say Clara. It said, "Entry complete," and beneath that, "She is not waiting anymore. She is remembering forward." Whatever had been locked beneath the Sullivan house in 1834 was no longer beneath. They called it folklore. They called it hysteria, trauma, metaphor. But truth doesn't require belief, it waits. And now, it speaks. In April 2024, a sealed vault was unearthed beneath the Ashcroft Medical Facility, Virginia, the same institution that received the final Sullivan descendants before their silent deaths. Inside, they found 24 wooden chairs arranged in a perfect circle, and one broken one, burnt, blackened, missing 2 legs. But more chillingly, a wax cylinder recorder still intact. No one dared play it at first. Then, during a private DARPA-backed investigation, it was played exactly once. Only once. And those present were never the same. Of the 12 attendees, 6 went blind within a week. 3 became catatonic. 1 spoke in reversed English until his tongue was surgically removed. And the remaining 2? They vanished. But the transcript survived. Just 7 words spoken in a young girl's voice. I didn't sit down. I was put here. That changed everything. It wasn't summoning. It was punishment. The circle was never a ritual of power. It was a courtroom. And she was the sentence. Clara Jennings, if that was even her name, hadn't summoned anything. She was the gate. The last living conduit of a memory too old to hold, too dangerous to forget. And once the others died, the pattern broke. There was no one left to hold her in place. She wasn't rising. She was returning. Across the world, people now report hallways in their homes that feel one door too long. Dreams where every person turns their back to them. Devices turning on at 3:03 a.m. and playing nothing but breathing. One therapist in Prague described an 11-year-old patient drawing a perfect diagram of the Sullivan estate, floor by floor. She'd never left the city. She whispered that her imaginary friend told her what to draw. The friend's name, Clara, but she says that's not her real name. She says that's the name they gave her when they were afraid. So now the truth stands at the edge of waking memory. It doesn't want belief. It wants recognition. Because the 25th chair was never empty. It was waiting to be remembered. And now that it has been, she's wondering who took her place. Because someone always does. And if you hear that chair dragging tonight, don't move, don't look. Just remember, she was never the secret, she was the sentence, and you've just been seated.